and then there's things that
Sorry.
if I get to the edge of, it's not clear that it's authorized, let's just say.
It just started recording, just to let you know.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so shall we just jump right in?
We can, yes.
Okay, here we go. So we've just had a technical snafu that is an indication of two things. One, that we're using a miraculous but devilish technology, and it allows certain things and disallows other things, and we can't figure out the criteria for one or the other. We're lucky to be able to do it at all, and then we become frustrated when it's not perfect. It's a strange modern person's problem, or as we call it at home, a white man problem to have. But there's another aspect of it too. I mean, the last question you asked me before the connection died was something in the order of that there's a consequence to trying to read die-wise beyond the challenge of quote the ideas, that there's something in the language and in the way in what I tried to accomplish there that is both a challenge, and then it has some other layer of consequence. And the layer of consequence, this is me paraphrasing you now, the layer of consequence is something deeply challenging, bordering on some kind of transformative, that there's an occurrence that happens beyond just the transmission of information, let's say. Okay. And that's what I was responding to when our circuitry failed us. Or you could say, well, there's a point at which it's ill-advised to try to shed light in corners that of necessity are shadowy to us and our orientation to things. But let me see if I can push the boundary, the barrier just a little bit, and with respecting the boundary anyway. And say, when I was working in the death trade, the thing that I saw that was most transgressive was people trying to use an unchanged language to try to refer to and work within a fundamentally changed circumstance. The change I'm talking about, obviously, is the oncomingness of death. And it is, my declaration in many places has been that death is a god, that it's a deity, and that it needs to be respected, feared to a certain degree, I suppose, but certainly to be learned, not to be exhausted, but to be some familiarity has to be crafted on our end with this deity called death. And one of the ways you do that is that you properly acknowledge that the presence of death changes every fundamental thing. Let's use an obvious example. Families gather around the dying person, and many of them operationalize their love by trying to make sure that their dying loved one doesn't die. But they're dying anyway. So your love won't prevent them from dying. So then how to understand what love's fundamental responsibility is in a moment like that? My answer would be that even your understanding of love has to be changed by the presence of death. It can't persevere and continue as it once did. So you may once have understood that your responsibility as a loving person is to keep your loved one from harm or from suffering or sorrow or loneliness and so on. But when they're dying, you can't do any of that. So what's your love for now? And the answer is you have to love what's happening to them along with all the other things. That's how you make sure that your love obeys what's happening instead of defies it, you see? Okay, so can you imagine then seeing the circumstance unfold before you over and over again, and watching people flail and understanding that their job now is to submit to the realities of dying and to learn them, not to resist them or thwart them or be victorious over them. So that's where my attempt to make a language that was faithful to the proceedings, that's where it came from. It came from that terrible shortfall between those two circumstances. In other words, on my best days, I found a language that was respectful of the God. And I could even go further and say, on my best days, I found a language that was godly. And that's what you read. It's a theistic language, right? Or it's a language that's theistic in its function. And maybe that's the best way to say it. That the consequence is when some other world appears in the midst of our ordinary days, our ordinary days are deeply challenged to somehow continue in their ordinariness. And everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say this, though they may not recognize it. But we have the feeling that when something has changed, that there has to be a shift in the etiquette, a shift in the priorities, a shift in your understanding of what's asked of you, and so forth, right? I mean, we can agree with this idea well enough when we're talking about falling in love, right? With the kind of magic and the chemistry and all of that stuff. We don't argue then about the huge transformation and it makes, ordinary life look like paltry and insignificant and nobody understands you. It's a wonderful thing and etc. But if you take out love and put in dying, you can use virtually the same language to describe it. And the only difference is one of them you welcome and the other one not so much. So I thought my responsibility was to make a language that welcomed what was there anyway. And in that sense, I tried to be a good host of the realities of dying and to craft the kind of more heightened language that acknowledged all that and tried to, by example, lead others in the direction of hospitality instead of to a war footing, all the language of fighting and all of that, surviving and all that sort of thing. And I think I did it. I would rather say, I think they gave it to me. And it's not that I had nothing to work with. I knew what I was doing, but still that's no guarantee of success, And something about that seems to have drawn you and you recognized it in some fashion. And it means, I guess they knew what they were doing to do that to me, to make it available to you.
Thank you.
Okay. With all of this, of course, there are regrets. Of course, there are regrets. Down along the fence line, in the back 40 of your life, there's a pile of stones there, and you know what they are. Those are your regrets. And if you don't go down there, and if you don't visit them often, you're going to end up thinking that there's no pile there at all. And that's never true. Or you can end up deciding that it makes a pile a mile high, which is almost never true. So here it is. They're always there. And the pile is rarely as high as you think it is.
So how about this? When the ending of days comes into view, maybe that's a good time to go down there and visit that little altar. Because that's what it becomes now, an altar where you can pray. Here's an idea. Don't add another stone to the pile by how you are with the ending of days. Just remember, and then climb that little hill, picking up one stone at a time, and then putting it down. Remembering, it's not all bad. And when you get to the top, look around now, because that's the vast field and pasture of your life, and everything in it is now visible and lucid and clear, and you can only really see it from up there. And that's the big story.